Hello, I'm Simon Parker, and this is the Voice of Russia from London. Last week, thousands of people around the world embarked on a challenge to feed themselves for 5 days on just £5. That's what 21% of the world's population have to do every day. The challenge comes from the Live Below the Line campaign, an initiative from the Global Poverty Group. I've been taking part in the challenge this week, and around the world, Voice of Russia correspondents have been exploring the theme of extreme poverty in their countries and regions. In today's show, we'll be hearing reports from Washington, Moscow, London and Bangladesh in an attempt to illustrate the many different attitudes towards food, its cost and its availability around the world, with poverty meaning many different things in different countries. Joining me in the studio to discuss this issue is Elisha London, the UK Country Director of the Global Poverty Project, and Manuel Roche from the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, an economic research centre at Oxford University. Elisha London from the Global Poverty Project, tell us about the campaign and what it aims to achieve.
So Live Below the Line started 3 years ago, and it started with one of our colleagues at the Global Poverty Project thinking we talk about extreme poverty a lot, but we can never know what it really is. We could never know what it's like. And he challenged himself to live on the equivalent of £1 a day, $1.50 a day, which is the extreme poverty level. The campaign grew, people joined him, and we thought this is a great campaign. So over the last 3 years, we've had 20,000 people do the challenge. This week, or last week, and in the coming weeks, we've had over 20,000 people just this year take on this challenge. And it's designed to challenge our thinking. 1.2 billion people live below this line for everything every day. We just do it for food and drink. But it really does challenge your perspective on the state of extreme poverty that the world is living in, much of the world. But it also gives us a chance to talk to our friends and family, raise some money as you do it to support some incredible organisations tackling extreme poverty around the world. And so far we've raised over $3 million globally this year, and we're looking to raise $5 million in the next couple of weeks.
Manuel Roche from the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. We're going to be speaking about poverty today. What actually is poverty? What definition would you put on the concept?
We at OFI focus from a multidimensional perspective. So what we do is that we take Amartya Sen, these economists who won the Nobel Prize of Economy a while back, and we take his approach, which is looking at the multiple deprivation that people experience. And so he make a distinction between having resources, such as income, and the outputs that would be being nourished or having access to services, education, water, and so on. And so what we, the concept that we take on poverty is this concept of capability. So people should be able to achieve those valuable outcomes in life. And so experiencing $1 a day poverty perhaps is a way to approach to those type of deprivation that people experience. In this particular case, people are experiencing how difficult it is to eat.
21% of the world's population have less than £1 a day to spend on food, 1.2 billion people on the planet. Elisha London from the Global Poverty Project, do you think it's hard for people to contextualise this figure and get to grips with such a large figure?
Absolutely. I think when we talk about really big numbers, it's hard to imagine what it could be like. 1.2 billion, it's a huge number of people. And I think that taking on a challenge like Live Below the Line does contextualise it in so much as these individual people with families, people that they love, living in very difficult circumstances. And it makes it just that little bit more real. At least that's what it intends to do, and that's the feedback that we get from the participants that take it on.
As part of today's discussion into poverty and the varying degrees of poverty around the world, Voice of Russia correspondents have been exploring the theme in their regions. Coming up, we'll be hearing from Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow and Syed Rahman Raju from Dhaka's Daffodil University to discuss attitudes towards food in Bangladesh. We'll also be hearing from Andrew Hiller in Washington as he attempts to buy a week's groceries for just $10. But first to the streets of London, where we've been asking people if they could feed themselves on just £1 a day.
Well, you just couldn't. I mean, you can't even get a cup of coffee or, a drink for less than that, can you? Well, I suppose you can get some water maybe for 85p, but, how are you then going to get something to eat as well?
I think it's possible if you think about maybe growing stuff in your garden, or maybe try to do different things, to try to find different ways to do things, you know. Basically that is something like that. If you try to do it through that way, maybe it's possible, you know. I think as I said, if you try to find different and alternative ways to get your food, I think you can have a very nutritious diet with good price.
Probably not in London. Well, depends though. Like, you can see like way of saving up. Depends on your lifestyle and what you do. Because of course, like, rent transport is massively expensive here, as everyone knows, I think. But I mean, the idea, sometimes it occurs to me that the idea of walking, sometimes it saves up as well, or like cycling. So maybe not with £1, but like saving up as well. It's like not taking the tube every day and just like have a walk, even if like 20 minutes.
It would be rice. We'd have to go back and see what they do in the third world. You'd have to look back, which is probably a healthier diet anyway than most of the stuff we eat. You'd have to look at rice and pulses and, gosh, cut out pretty much everything that's unnecessary. Confectionery and alcohol and all those things. Fruit and veg is expensive. I mean, vegetables can be found sometimes on market stalls, but it's never the best quality. And yeah, you'd have to look. Potatoes, obviously. But yeah, it would be a struggle.
Those voices coming from London. Jose, hearing that and thinking of my experience at the weekend of trying to buy food for less than £5. Buying food on this budget and buying food of nutritional value they're not incredibly linked, are they? You'll be hard to find something which is cheap but also nutritious.
It's not very easy. So the way in which this pound a day is computed in the World Bank, where this measure is actually designed, is that they see the nutritional values that you need and the product that exists, and so they see how is that you could be able to achieve it. It's very interesting from people who are having this experience of the campaign, that they actually are linking in the website and seeing how is that they can be able to reach these values. So, for example, they have to rely on eating dals or different grains and so on. But what is important from what we just heard in the interviews before is that actually you have to have a lot of information on where to find this food. And that tells you that, well, it's not always just enough to have the £1, but also you have to have knowledge and education to be able to stretch that pound and actually have the calories that you need.
Something which I think is particularly important to address at this stage is the relativity between what a pound may be in the UK in relation to, for example, India. Can you attempt to do that? Is it that easy?
Very difficult. And so there's a whole program in the World Bank that tries to do this, and there's a lot of academics that are against it and think that it's actually not possible and it costs too much. What they do is that they compute something that is the PPP, which is the purchasing power parity. So this is not a normal dollar. This is a dollar that is equivalent to what you can buy in the US, to what you can buy in India. But yet, in order to reach that figure, it's very complicated. You have to collect a lot of different data, and there's, for example, the list of data that they have to collect. There are products that just simply don't exist in some countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Wines that is in the list, and so when they go to look for the wine price, they have to go to a market that only expatriates go, and so really to make it comparable is quite a challenge.
Elisha London from the Global Poverty Project. I think wherever you live in the world, to live on this amount of money and to feed yourself on this amount of money, from what we've heard there's a huge thought process having to go on. I mean, when I was shopping yesterday, I spent 10 times longer in the shop than what I normally do, because I was using a calculator to work out exactly what I was going to buy. There is a real thought process going on, isn't there?
There is, and I think it shows we do live in a world, say here in London, of convenience, where you can purchase a range of choice wherever it's quite easy. And for those living in extreme poverty, it is a huge thought process around how you manage the resources that you do have. Again, this £1 we're doing just for food and drink, and as I said, the purchasing power parity shows that universally that buys you around the same things. It's complex, but around 2 bowls of rice, some vegetables, some cooking oil, that's about it. And that takes up the entire income. That's even before you've thought about education and housing and what if your child gets sick. So it is a huge challenge, and that 1.2 billion people have to go through this thought process, and how you manage your resources to provide for your family is a hugely challenging one.
With this idea in our minds, we now turn our attention to Russia, where £1 a day equates to approximately 50 rubles. But the question is, what can you actually buy with that amount of money? And how does Moscow, often ranked as one of the most expensive cities in the world, compare with the rest of the country? Dasha Chernyshova has been looking at how people with low incomes make ends meet in Moscow and outside the capital.
Just as any other capital, Moscow stands out as being different from the rest of the country. To see life through the eyes of non-Muscovites, I drove some 70 kilometers outside of the capital to a place called Bekasovo. 80-year-old Nadezhda lives in a 5-story building with a pension of roughly £200 or $300. She says life is not easy, but she does have other resources. A plot of land resembling a small farm. 15 chickens and 4 goats make a large contribution to her family's food consumption.
We have our little farm, chickens, goats. It makes a difference for us in terms of nutrition, as pensions are not large and it's difficult. But we also have a kitchen garden, our own potatoes, vegetables, and that makes our life easier.
This is a common story for those outside of big cities. Meanwhile, in Moscow, the average family of 3 spends about £400 a month on food. This is about $600. But those on a tight budget may find a loaf of bread for 20 pence or 30 cents, and a pint of milk for 30 pence or 50 cents. However, the capital has its own multi-layered pricing system, with lifestyle depending on one's income. For example, the same goods may be twice as expensive in a premium class shop. Such prices are unimaginable for those on a fixed budget and the homeless. Oleg Olyakov, deputy head of the Orthodox movement Kursky railway station, Homeless Children, that helps the homeless people provide free food to those in need.
We provide food for the homeless. They are mostly exposed to the risk. But we give food to everyone who asks, migrants, pensioners, and even to the middle class who look for adventures.
Big Russian cities have a large number of such organizations, and in Moscow one can eat for free every day. And the cost of a single meal can be as little as £1 a day.
We give rich soup, tea and bread for dinner. Altogether it costs us 20-40 rubles. If we add fish or meat, that will be a healthy dish that costs no more than 40 rubles.
Russia's subsistence level currently stands at £130 or $200 a month. This figure obviously varies from region to region, with Moscow being the most expensive place to live. Those who live below this poverty level amount to 11% of the population, and their numbers are steadily dropping.
Dasha Chernyshova sending us that report from Moscow. Jose Manuel Roche from the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. How often is it that there will be that disparity between rural and urban communities?
That is worldwide the case. If you go to India, there's not only difference between the urban and the rural, but there's also difference between the regions. In just smaller countries, you have definitely always the difference between the urban and the rural. And so it means that the prices are not the same. And so this $1 or £1 a day is not exactly what you are able to you cannot use it the same way if you are in the urban and the rural. And what it tells is that although it gives a sense of the level of poverty and income, you realize that there are other aspects of poverty that matter. So, for example, if you have the supermarket in the urban areas that you can actually access, but you in the rural areas don't have transport and they are far from your home, then probably you'll be able to do less with the pound. So you need other aspects too.
What about in terms of attitudes towards food and food consumption and food waste? Do you think that people from urban environments are much more wasteful? Is that a trend which also exists?
That might be differences that happen, but equally you could say when you think in other context, aspect that could affect, for example, you have a drought, right? And so when you have a drought, there's no food that you can buy. So still you have the money, but you are actually not able to spend that money. And so perhaps if you, for measurement and for ideas of knowing poverty, then also knowing the level of undernourishment is very important, which is an outcome of rather than the input. The dollar a day gives you a sense, but it actually doesn't capture the full extent of what poverty means. And so you need to see other outcomes, but also you need to see perhaps access to education, you see access to services in water and sanitation and so on, which is what other measures do. What is interesting that while they do it, they realize also how lucky they are because they have all the other things sorted while they are only worrying about the food.
Elisha from the Global Poverty Project, I think Jose's brought up a very interesting point there. When exactly will a campaign like this go from being just a campaign and an exercise, and when will kind of people actually start taking this issue a lot more seriously?
I think campaigns like this help people to take it more seriously. Certainly that's what we've seen from the responses from participants that do it. As I'm sure you'll find shopping and living on this Live Below the Line challenge for the week makes you think a lot about what this could be like. It makes you wonder what you could do differently in your own life. The campaign has an impact through the fundraising that happens for the charities that are fighting poverty on the ground. But the thing we find is 99% of people who finish the challenge come out the other side saying, I'm going to make changes in my life to have an impact, to change this, to do something about this. There's enough food in the world to feed everybody, but not everyone has enough food. And what is it that I can do to change my eating habits, to make resources available, to talk to my governments and my businesses, to make sure that we can essentially fix the system that's broken?
I think something which is particularly interesting within this theme is the idea that some places where perhaps most people wouldn't normally associate with extreme poverty do have millions of people living below the poverty line. In February, the US President Barack Obama said in his State of the Union address that extreme poverty needed to be tackled. In the United States, millions of people rely on handouts as a way of staving off hunger. And this in a country renowned for its high levels of obesity, huge portion sizes and eating competitions. Andrew Hiller from the Voice of Russia's Washington Bureau went out to see how hard it was to eat on a budget in the United States.
As part of our effort to see if we can survive on £1 a day or $1.50, I went to the Shalom Kosher Supermarket, an independent grocery store in Wheaton, Maryland. I decided that I'd pool my money and aim to buy a week's worth of groceries for $10. Let's enter the store and see what we can do. In the store, I met up with shopper Robin Duckelbaum. She tried to give me some helpful advice.
I would probably go with challah or bagels and some peanut butter.
Bagels at 50 cents a pop seemed a bit pricey, and the peanut butter would have taken about a third of my week's allowance. So next, I turned to a sales clerk for advice. Do you think it's possible to buy a week's worth of groceries for $10?
I don't believe that. Nope. I don't think it's possible. Milk alone today is $3.69. Yogurt's $1.59. Bread is $3.49. How are you going to buy weeks of groceries for $10?
Well, it's the quest we're on.
Yes, it is. It's a big quest, but it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Thankfully, another clerk at the grocery store seemed a bit more optimistic.
Possible it is, but would that be enough for the week? I don't know. Hi, my name is Carlos Ramirez and I work at Shalom Kosher.
Carlos was pretty critical of my first efforts.
Now, that's enough for the whole week? Probably is enough for a meal or 2 meals.
Ramirez offered some specific advice.
The area where is all the cans, you can find up good specials down there. And also on the produce department, right here also on the dairy department, you can find also a nice specials too.
Yogurt turned out to be a good buy at $1 a jar. 10 yogurts for $10. That could be 10 meals. So, I mean, not a whole week, but we're getting there. I'm seeing chickpeas, cans of chickpeas for 99 cents each, or a 3-bean salad, or Goya, some other canned vegetables. That's $1.29. So if I remove the yogurt, 3 yogurts, or if I remove the yogurts and the cabbage, that would give me about 4 cans of vegetable. Let me go a little bit further down the aisle and see if maybe I can find, I don't know, some kind of Chef Boyardee or something. I don't know. Chef Boyardee didn't fit the bill, or at least the budget. So I moved on to frozen foods. Looks like I can get a pound of cut green beans for $2.49. It's about a quarter of my week. But if I get rid of the cabbage and a can of beans, I might be able to go with the green beans or with peas and carrots, which are a little less for $2.29. It's possible. Okay. Thinking I have a plan, I head to the cashier. We're at $4.93. We got $6.92. It looks like I might be able to afford the hot dogs. Let's try the hot dogs. Ooh, the hot dogs put me over. They put me over by almost double. So I think hot dogs would have to go, and I'd have to get 2 cans of manwich or beans. Success. I bought $10 worth of food.
Andrew Hiller reporting from Washington. From one of the world's richest countries to one of the poorest now, Bangladesh, a country where the United Nations estimate that 41% of children under 5 suffer from stunted growth because of poor nutrition. Syed Rahman Raju is an academic at Dhaka's Daffodil University who has written extensively on food security in Bangladesh. We asked him how attitudes to food wastage vary throughout the country.
This is really interesting in Bangladesh, actually. You know, it's a resourceful country, and food security is an issue in this country. And if you think about wastage of food in rural level, it's not that much, actually, because there are lackings of food. So in that case, in black and white understanding, you can't say that food wastage is very much in Bangladesh. But in cities, especially, you know, this is a economy, it's growing economy, but in the cities, the fast food centers and high income group people, they are wasting food a lot because, you know, the economic disparity is very high in Bangladesh. Only 20% people, they are actually running with their personal economy in a way they can do the food wastage. But for village, 80% people in this country, they are not getting enough food. So wastage is not common here with these people. There are 3 crore family in the country, and normally we know that the 453 gram per person carbohydrate is very essential for anyone. And also we need animal food, animal protein and vegetable protein. But interestingly, you know, the land is getting squeezed for population, so enough fish is not available. If you think about 20 years back, people can go for fishing and by themselves from pond or rivers, but now it is not possible. So that's the point actually for malnutrition. It's not just production, it's also distribution. It's a huge issue in this country.
Syed Rahman Raju speaking to us there from Bangladesh. Elisha London from the Global Poverty Project. How will the world's growing population continue to kind of fuel this issue?
It's a really good question. So there's enough food, as you said earlier, to feed everybody in the world 1.5 times. So it's a matter of distribution. When it comes to population growth, there are projections that as population growth increases, if the distribution doesn't improve, then there may not be enough food to go around. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing, just to say on population growth in general, is we know that as countries lift themselves out of extreme poverty, as many have over the last 30 years, population actually decreases. And as families are wealthier, they have smaller families, better able to feed themselves. So the two go hand in hand. As we tackle population, we'll tackle food security, and we need to tackle food security at the same time as population.
Jose Manuel Roche from the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. Are there just simply too many mouths to feed?
Sometimes there are, but it all depends on how there are means and resources to actually make it better. What we hear from the case of Bangladesh, it was not only about production but also distribution. So we are talking about whether the markets work, whether there are enough, for example, roads, whether the roads are in good condition so the product can be distributed, and that depends on public investment. It depends also on whether people have the information on where they can find. So there are so many factors that influence whether people are able to do enough with those resources. And so what is interesting here is that the same level of income can take you to very different results depending on those circumstances. And so, for example, in our research in Oxford, what we've seen is that countries with the same level of income Rwanda or Burkina Faso, for example, they both have very different levels of poverty, which means that there's something in that context that with less, they do more. And so what we need to ask is, what are those factors that help to actually do better?
Finally, and this is a very broad question because we have been speaking very broadly about this issue today, but what's the future for this issue? How are governments and organisations going to attempt to tackle this issue?
The future, I think, is one where we have huge challenges, but it can be extremely positive. We actually can be the first generation to see an end to extreme poverty. It's, in my lifetime alone, percentage of people living in extreme poverty has gone from 50% to under 25%. That's just in the last 30 years. We can be the first generation to end hunger. There's enough food. We have the resources. Coming up with this year's G8, it's a huge focus with the Enough Food for Everyone IF campaign. A whole lot of voices coming together to talk to our G8 leaders to say we need to tackle this issue of hunger. We need to make sure that investment is put into small-scale agriculture, into nutrition. We need to make sure that companies are paying their fair share of taxes to make sure the resources are flowing. We're stopping land grabs and use of biofuels to feed people instead of cars. I think there's a huge opportunity we have to speak up, to change our own lives and how we eat and how we get involved in these issues, but also to speak to our governments and speak to our the companies that that are involved in these issues to say that we can be the generation to see an end to hunger, and we've all got a part to play.
Jose, very briefly, how would you respond to what Elisha said?
Yeah, I think certainly there's the feeling and the research shows that it's possible to end hunger and to end poverty in our lifetime, or certain level of deprivation. What is interesting from this campaign is that people experience with one aspect of poverty, even if poverty has actually different dimension and different aspects. Now, what we are moving towards is that the world is looking more and more that poverty is not only about income. It's about other dimension, education, health, eradicating child mortality, and so on. The fact that Bangladesh is actually not a country with very strong institutions, but what it shows is that with certain weak institutions, it's still possible to reduce poverty quite a lot. And one of the factors in Bangladesh that is very strong is a very strong civil society that there is in Bangladesh that is doing incredible programs in sanitation, in nutrition and so on, and they are achieving great gains. So Bangladesh might be one of those countries that can, in the next few years, reduce and eradicate poverty.
Elisha, very briefly, I know you have something to say.
Just to say, the Live Below the Line campaign is happening around the world and will be open until the end of June. So if anyone wanted to sign up to do the challenge, there's a whole lot of resources on livebelowtheline.com to see how this is possible. You can see other people's stories and you can sign up for a charity of your choice.
Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. I'd like to thank my guests, Elisha London, the UK Country Director for the Global Poverty Project, and Jose Manuel Roche from the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, and all our contributors from around the world.